All right, guys, check it out. Today on American Heritage Garage, we're kicking the 40 Chevy out and we're bringing in a 2015 F-150. It's had some coolant leaking at the turbos, so we are going to bring that in. We're going to take the turbos off, replace the lines at the turbos and on the engine block. I'm going to walk you guys through it. It's Friday night, so it should be a pretty good weekend project. Now we just got to figure out how to get this out and that in. So I'm going to try a little movie magic and see if we can't make this happen. Do a little I Dream of Jeannie here. No, didn't work. All right, we'll try something different. No, still didn't work. My hands are cold. Let's see what we got here. Holy crap, it worked. I'm getting pretty good at this kind of stuff. It's probably the only time that'll ever happen. But anyway, here it is, 2015 F-150. I'm going to get this thing jacked up. I'm going to get the wheels off it real quick, and then we're going to start in on it. Like I said, coolant leak. Hopefully get it knocked out. Let's get after it. Before we get too far into this, I want to run through a few of these fittings and the gaskets I had to get. So I'll show you right here. Here's the diagram. Okay, so you guys can take a look at that. Okay, that would be the front of the engine that way. So there you have where the lines go in, up around the cylinder head on the side of the engine. Maybe the block. They might go under the manifold here actually. Here you have the fitting on the inside of the turbo. Okay, here's a fitting on the outside top of the turbo. Okay, here's where the this is the fitting that goes into the back here of the engine up by the cylinder head. So they're mirrored as far as part numbers go, but I'll do a nice pause and shut up for a second so you can see the numbers if you need them. Okay, so we got that out of the way. So here we're going to look at the exhaust gaskets at the out of the turbo going to the exhaust pipe. There's two of them. There's the number. Okay, here are the turbo gaskets. There is a left and a right one. Okay, so the numbers are different. There's two oil line gaskets here. There's the number for those. Okay, then you have two fittings that go into the engine block. These are the two that go on the back up by the cylinder heads. And then there's four of the fittings that go into the turbos, all the same. So there we go on the parts. I am going to dig into the getting the wheels off real quick. Then I have to go and get the inner fender well off here. I'll show you real quick how to do that. You get a fancy little tool or some pliers. And then we got to drain the coolant. Even though the coolant is higher than the turbos, we'll still get a lot of that coolant out of there. So I'm going to jump into that here real quick. All right, so we're up under the wheel well here, and I'm going to show you real quick a couple different types of the push-ins and small little screws they got holding this guy in. So the first type you have is this guy right here. Let's see if I can do this without losing too much light. So I got one of these handy dandy tools. Okay, you can do them with needle nose, you can do them with diagonal cuts, just don't squeeze too hard and cut them. So this style, the center comes out. Okay, then you get up underneath it and pull it out. Okay, so that's this style. Okay, looks kind of like that. Okay, it's got the center. All right, next one is where is it? Right up in there. Okay, that's just a standard. You got to get up underneath it. Again, having a tool like this makes life easy. Get underneath it give it a little look at the dirt and stuff. This is gonna be fun. Okay, and that one broke. So I got more, but that's just how it goes. And then it's got a few of these little screws, but for the most part, this thing just kind of is held in here. Then also up underneath here, right there, here, in different spots, there's stuff being held on from the inside. So we'll get the rest of those out and go from there. All right, so we're going to start up underneath here. As you can see, there's a considerable amount of coolant. So I want to show you, starting underneath, what we're looking at as far as doing. So let me get some repositioning here. So here's your turbo right here. So you have one exhaust bolt, then there's another one up here. And then if you're following my screwdriver, right where it's at, there's one fitting and one line that needs to come off. There's just a little clip in there. So we'll have to get a hook or whatever we can to get that out. Then here are your oil lines. So there's a Torx here and then a Torx here on the other side of this line. So we'll have to get those off. We'll have to get the exhaust off, and then we'll move back out and under to the top side here, which I'll probably start with the more difficult stuff first because that's always the easiest way to go. All right, so here's what we're looking at, the driver's side turbo, okay? So if you see, here's one oil line, or excuse me, a coolant line up here. So this is a fitting that's going to get changed. Then you have a Torx here, a Torx on the other side here, and then one here. That's what holds the turbo on. Okay, so you have one more exhaust bolt over here we'll have to get out. And then the the intake. Okay, so we'll have to get those undone and pushed off of there. And for the most part, there's a vacuum line. There may be another miscellaneous connector or two. But for the most part, that's going to be the extent of what we do. So my biggest battle is going to be trying to get a camera in here to show you what I'm doing while I'm doing it. So let me get set up and decide what we're going to do, and we'll touch base with you in a minute. So here's what we're going to do. I can't get a good angle with the camera on the tripod, so I am going to walk you through this kind of as I do it. So I'm going to take short clips before and after, and I'm going to do it in kind of small segments. So right now we're going to work on getting this and this hose clamp off and these pushed out of the way as far as we can. Then I'm going to take a pick tool and get the E-clip out of the fitting for this coolant line here. And there's a vacuum line up here that I'm going to get off, and we'll get that knocked out, and then we'll crawl underneath and take a look at that. Step one is complete. The intake tubes are off. I did have to loosen them, take them off from the top also, and they're in these real stupid perches that were a pain and whatever. Ford always has a way. I hate to be a hater, but Ford always has a way to make me wonder why they do the things they do. So up here the vacuum line's off, and I do have the little E-clip out of the coolant line on the top of the turbo. I haven't got it out yet. It's going to take a little bit of prying, but you want to be a little careful. You don't want to damage the pipe because that goes up and back to behind the engine up against the firewall. I do not know if I'm going to do those fittings on the back side of the engine because I'm thinking you have to actually pull the engine, and that's just not going to happen. So just for you guys, so you know, the E-clip looks like that. You do not have to put this back in. It comes with the new fittings. So there's that step. Next, we're going to crawl under and try to get the other clip off the other line in the exhaust bolts in the oil line, which is down under here. That corrugated line right there that turns up and goes to right here, straight on the bottom side of the turbo. So we'll get that next. Day two, I got the turbo out. As you can see, that's where it bolts to the engine side right there, to the manifold. And then there's your exhaust pipe. There's your two intake hoses. There's the engine side coolant line. Then zip tied up there out of the way is the top of the turbo coolant line. So realistically, as far as nuts and bolts go, there isn't that much on here. You got 3 that hold the turbo on. They're T50 Torx. Then you got the 2 that hold the exhaust pipe on. You got the hose clamps here, a couple hose clamps up there. The stupid little clips, the E-clips that hold the 2 lines in the fittings. So it's not involved with nuts and bolts and taking things apart. It's just awkward angles, a little bit of contortionist type stuff that's more time consuming than anything. So really, I'm just going to show you guys this side. The other side is identical. So I already have the exhaust pipe off. We'll walk over there real quick. But I'm not going to go through and film the whole removal of that because there's no need. It's the same. And it just takes time messing around. So here we are up under here. Here's your turbo. Same thing. Coolant line on the top. There's one on the engine side. I already do have the exhaust bolts off on this side, the nuts off, so I could slide it back. I'll show you a couple things. I've made an executive decision. I am not going to replace the fittings on the cylinder head or on the block side, just because of the awkward angles, and it's just, they're not leaking. It's far more time consuming than it should be. So these back here, if you can follow it up there, it goes up behind the engine, up against the firewall, and there's really just no way to get to it without either maybe pulling the trans or pulling the whole engine out or lifting the cab up or something crazy. And that's just labor that myself and the vehicle owner are not wanting to incur. The one on the engine is held on by a bracket. It's the same type of fitting. It looks pretty similar to this one right here. But it's held on by a bracket. So it hasn't had, there's probably hardly any vibration or anything like that. So that O-ring in there is good. I'm a little nervous about these up here because you have to rotate these up and out of the way to get the turbo off. So I hope bothering them didn't cause any sort of damage to the O-ring, but we'll just have to wait and see. That's just kind of something we're going to cross at this point. So again, here's the passenger side. It's still intact. You got your 3 turbo bolts right here. You got 2 exhaust flange bolts. You got the 2 intake, and then the 2 E-clips that hold the lines in there, and then on the back side. And then also you got your oil line down underneath there. So that's all off on the other side. I'm going to do the fittings here. I'll show you those real quick. Got the turbo on the bench here. This is looking at like the outside of the turbo as you'd see it from inside the fender well. Your first fitting that's on top is right here where my thumb is, and then the one that faces the engine is right here. It's a 19mm socket. My fingers are crossed that they just turn out. They're aluminum fittings, so you know how that goes. Sometimes there can be some damage to the threads. Also, this is kind of a 2-piece exhaust flange here, so they got the threads or the studs ran through the back side here. I did not get new studs, and I don't need to. So I'm not going to disturb this gasket. There's still pressure, downward pressure on it. It's never been loosened up or anything. So we'll just scrub those with wire brush a little bit, put a little anti-seize on them and crank them up. This is a built-in donut style. I might put a little bit of exhaust stuff around here. It's always like some exhaust cement or something. I always like to put a thin layer sometimes just to help keep everything in place. So yeah, I'm going to knock these out real quick and we'll get the turbo mounted back up. 2 fittings are out right here. They were not He-Man tight, so when you put them back in, don't go nuts. These are just aluminum fittings, so you don't want to tear these threads up in this thing. Actually you can see the O-ring that goes around this guy is in pretty bad shape. On the new one, I put a little bit of silicone grease all around the O-ring, just a little bit on each one. And then on the inside, there's an O-ring in here too, down at the underneath where the clip would be. I put a little silicone grease in there as well, just to help everything slip in so there's no damage or marring. So pretty much, it was super simple. It took like 2 seconds. There's a new one, and there's a new one. You can see the grease down in there. So I'm going to wipe this thing up, wipe my oil passage flange up there, wipe up my turbo flange here, get the new fresh gasket on, and put this sucker back in and tear into the other side. So we're going to get that done, and we'll stop back in. Turbo is back in. Just wanted to point out a couple things real quick. First off, make sure and leave the exhaust off until you get the other side done. Otherwise, you're going to have to take it back off. Your turbo bolts go to 28 foot-pounds, the 3 turbo bolts. And make sure you torque those before you put this guy in. Because if you can see, this guy blocks this upper one. So I actually made that mistake and had to fish the clip back out. And that's a pain to get it to sit back in there. But anyway, we got that knocked out. Trying to think. The oil lines are fine, no big deal. The gasket on the turbo has tangs that hold the gasket to the turbo, which helps a little bit. Yeah, that's pretty much all the important stuff. So I am going to jump over and tackle the other side. One real quick note here, guys. So still working on getting this turbo out, and the starter is in the way of getting the oil line bolts down. And I can't get to the back side of the turbo to get the coolant line clip off. Starter's pretty easy to come off. There's 2 bolts on the bell housing. One is here. One is up at the top right there. No big deal. And then your wiring connections are on the solenoid. There's 2 posts that have two different wires going to them. So get that knocked out. This starter seems to be a little stuck in here. It's going to take a little bit to get it out, but it should come loose here in just a second. Just getting everything buttoned up here. We're over on the passenger side. I have the driver's side inner fender well and everything all back on. A couple other little tips I want to give you guys before we wrap here. 2 things, and I think I already said it. Make sure this is all torqued. Your turbo's torqued before you clip your line in, because you can't get to the bolts. And the last thing that I forgot to say before, a bit of a struggle was getting the line that comes from the engine into the opposite side of this in as you were putting the turbo on. So what I did was I got the turbo in place, and I ran all 3 of the bolts in just 1 or 2 threads, just barely hanging in there. That way I could pull the turbo all the way back and still have it flexing a little bit. And then I got the end of the line in the fitting, and then you could kind of pry against the line, and there was some flex, since that line that's on the engine side is a stationary line that's bracketed on there. So having that little bit of flex, if you were to go and bolt the turbo in all the way up against the manifold, you wouldn't be able to get that flexed into place as easily. So just something to think about. Overall, this wasn't a bad job, but yeah, we'll chat about a couple things in the close here, and then I'm going to get this thing out and get the 40 Chevy back in here. So let me finish putting this inner fender well in, and we'll call it good. Just so you know, I did test run this thing, and good news is I put the cardboard down to see if there's any leaks, and there's not. So I'm a happy guy. Good weekend. All right, guys, got the F-150 all finished up. It's not leaking. I ran it up to operating temperature. I let it cool down. No drips, no leaks, no anything. I'm going to hose it off real quick a little bit, try to get some of the antifreeze off it, and yeah, we'll go from there. it was a successful project. I'm pretty happy. Got it done in the weekend, so that's good. Couple things. There's some tips in there that are definitely going to be valuable. This is the first time I've ever done this job, so overall I'm pretty happy with how it went. The second one went a little quicker on the other side. Definitely be mindful that on the passenger side you have the starter, and the top coolant line does not move out of the way as far as the top coolant line on the driver's side. So it's a little more of a pain in the butt getting the turbo out of there. I didn't use all of the parts that I showed you at the beginning, and that was because the access to those parts, the other fittings, there's two of them directly at the back of the engine, and I mean they're right at the firewall. You can't even see them. So you'd either have to lift the cab up, pull the motor out, unless there's some other tip or trick that I don't know about. And then the ones on the side of the engine, they weren't leaking. They were both stationary, and for the extra time and money that it would cost in labor, it just wasn't worth it. So I was nervous about the back fittings because I was pivoting those lines up and down so much. I was worried that that would cause them to leak, but so far so good, so I'm pretty happy. This thing's out, going back to the owner, and the 40 Chevy's coming back in, and we're going to get back to work on that. So until next time, guys, we'll see you out here at American Heritage Garage.